Hey, so today we have Justin Roff-Marsh. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did.
All right, perfect. So um, I know of Justin from his book here, The Machine, A Radical Approach to the Design of Sales Function. And let me just forewarn you, Justin is going to slay some sacred cows and really make you think through a couple of different things. So welcome, Justin. Thanks so much for joining us today.
It's nice to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So let me allow the groups who may not have heard of you before, maybe read your book, give us a little bit of a background. What's really allowed you to develop this expertise around sales process engineering?
Well, I started off in sales fairly young, early 20s. I worked in the insurance industry in Australia, which was in a part of the industry that was growing very rapidly at the time. So I ended up going fairly quickly from being a salesperson to a team leader to a sales manager, and at one point had 100 people, was responsible for maintaining and managing a team of 100 salespeople, split into 4 smaller teams of 25.
Okay.
So as a consequence, I got a pretty fast experience of the traditional sales model, the pros and cons of it. Our salespeople were 100% commissioned. We spent a fortune on recruiting new salespeople every year. We turned them over fairly quickly. I think we turned our salespeople, about 4.5 times a year. So it was a high pressure boiler room type environment. We generated large amounts of money with that sales team. But it was kind of a baptism by fire. And when I moved from that business to another business, which was actually a subsidiary initially of the first business, I was desperately looking for a more sustainable way to build a sales function, and ended up through a process of trial and error, arriving at pretty much the model that we introduced to clients today, but also arriving at the key realization, which was that if you really want to scale sales aggressively, you need to take away salespeople's autonomy, because what I call the artisanal approach to sales doesn't scale. It has diminishing returns built into it.
Okay, so the artisan approach of the outside salesperson, the field rep, taking some of that autonomy away. Now, I can hear people, sacred cow number one.
We don't take some of it away. We take all of it away.
Okay, so let's walk through that. So I could just hear people screaming right now, no, you can't do that. We're not machines. We're not robots. So walk us through that. How do you get away with that?
Yeah, so let me define autonomy first. When I talk about autonomy, I'm addressing the question of whether or not salespeople should be autonomous.
Okay.
Now, obviously, and I shouldn't have to say this, but just to be clear, every person has and should have and must have in an organization some degree of autonomy. Your receptionist shouldn't have to ask if it's okay when she visits the bathroom. But I'm not talking about autonomy in that sense. What I'm talking about is whether or not an individual is essentially autonomous, or the opposite, whether they're a member of a team. So what I'm essentially talking about, or what I'm talking about, is whose drumbeat an individual marches to. Pretty much everyone in your organization, with the exception of salespeople, if questioned, would readily admit that they're members of a team. And the implication of that is that they would understand either implicitly or explicitly that they go to work and they march to the drumbeat of the team. In other words, the drumbeat of the organization. But most executives and managers go to significant effort to design the sales function based around the premise that salespeople are autonomous, which in this sense means they march to their own drumbeat. We talk about salespeople's accounts, we talk about their territory, and we pay them on a piece rate. So not only do we deliberately structure their environments so that they are autonomous, in other words, they march to their own drumbeat, but we underline their autonomy every month, because when typical salespeople check their pay sheet, they're being paid on a piece rate, like production people used to 100 years ago.
Right.
Commissions, in other words. So we're not arguing that salespeople shouldn't have some degree of autonomy at all. What we're arguing is that salespeople should not be essentially autonomous. In other words, we're arguing that rather than being individuals who march to the beat of their own drum and are paid commission, they should be team members just like everyone else in your organization who march to a central drum beat.
So let me break that down maybe a little bit. So what you're saying is, yes, be autonomous in keeping your personality. Yes, be autonomous in being excellent and competent what you do, having that sense of mission fulfillment, but part of a bigger mission, part of a team accomplishment where you're part of the machine, if you will, to couch your book, but part of a group effort, part of a team effort, as opposed to the stereotypical type A personality who might sell a lot. And like you said earlier on your old approach, make a ton of money, but then leave dead bodies in the wake from blowing people up because they're not doing the things that
Yes. Yeah. So let me just make a fairly obvious point, but it's an important one. Part of the success of humans as a species is our ability to work as teams. You know, the very first Homo sapien would not have survived for long if he or she operated as an individual. We quickly would have been hunted down and eaten by saber-toothed tigers.
Right.
Our strength as a species comes from our ability to hunt as a team, to fight as a team, or subsequent to the invention of business, to engage in capitalism as a team. And of course, if you look at any other area of the business, it should be clear that whether we're talking about production, whether we're talking about design or engineering, whether we're talking about marketing or finance, anyone who works in those functions has abandoned the idea years, if not generations ago, decades ago, that that they would be better off doing their work individually. You know, work in all of those areas is prosecuted as a team. And what happens is, if we decide we want to get serious about sales, for exactly the same reasons, we don't hunt alone in the savannah, or we didn't. It makes sense to, at some point, if we get serious, to adopt a team-based approach to sales. Now, being a member of a team is the exact opposite of operating autonomously.
Got it.
There isn't some happy medium. Those two are exact opposites.
So for those that are seeing the video here, I have from Justin's book a segment of what the sales process looks like. And one thing, Justin, you published the book how long ago? It's been a while now.
I want to say 2007, but I'm not great with dates. But about
okay, got it. So
5 years ago or something, yeah.
So it's been a while, and you've been beating the drum of sales should move more to an inside sales. And now all of a sudden, here we are. Guess what? Sales has now moved to an inside because you can't go out in the field.
Folks don't have a choice. Yeah.
Right. Everything is shut down. So you were.
Yeah, I hate to admit it, but this has been a busy period for us. You know, we've been beating this drum for 24 years. And we, like everyone else, expected with COVID-19 that our clients would abandon us and the phone would stop ringing. But the opposite has been the case because, of course, everybody has found themselves, whether they like it or not, with an inside sales team on their hands. Now those two things are not. We should probably explain the linkage between salespeople's autonomy and inside sales.
Please, I was just going there.
Because there's a bit of a jump. It's a bit too much of a jump. So the first thing that we advocate is the application of division of labor in a very principled way to the sales function. So we divide up sales into a number of discrete tasks, just like you would divide up the activity that occurs within an operating room in a hospital into a number of discrete tasks, and then have specialists responsible for performing each task. So the question I always ask of critics of division of labor in sales environments, whose objection is typically that division of labor will take away the artistry performed by the individual, the question I always ask is a brain surgeon any less of a brain surgeon when they don't have to, when they're no longer responsible for anesthesia, or
Right.
for setup for setup and cleaning of the operating theater.
Now,
So that's the first jump, division of labor. To get to inside sales, um, um, what we end up realizing once we apply division of labor is that there's a material difference between performing sales tasks inside and performing sales tasks outside. Salespeople are significantly more productive when they're inside. And as has just been discovered in other areas of the organization, if we must have outside activities, it makes a lot of sense to split the responsibility for inside activities and outside activities. So one of the first divisions we make when we apply division of labor is we split the people who do the inside work from the people who do the outside work. And it surprises many executives when they're forced to recognize this. But even in a major account sales environment, if you look at all of the activities that are required in order to win an opportunity, 90% of them occur inside, not outside.
so
Contrary to popular belief.
could you give a couple of examples? Because there's a lot of people that they might know this from an SDR or BDR, where they're converting leads or doing lead generation as an SDR or converting leads as a BDR. But yours is a slightly different approach, where your inside sales is, yes, appointment setting, but it's also off of email campaigns and a couple of others. So can you give your approach, please?
Yeah, so the first thing that we do is we do away with this toxic notion of SDRs and what is the other one, BDRs.
BDRs, yes.
None of our clients have them, and I think it's a fantastic case of what Deming would have called sub-optimization. I mean,
Okay.
you can increase the productivity of a salesperson by providing them an SDR, because you filter out all but those prospects that have a high likelihood of converting and feed only those to the salesperson. Obviously, the salesperson's productivity goes up, but you're destroying value measured across the process as a whole, because you end up reducing throughput to just a trickle. So you
walk us through that.
maximize the productivity of the salesperson at the expense of the amount of money you cart off to the bank each month.
So can you talk me through that? How does that reduce it to a trickle? Can you help me see that?
So the cold hard reality is you bank dollars, not percentages.
Okay.
So the job of the manager should be to increase the amount of dollars you take to the bank, not to increase percentages, not to increase efficiency. Efficiency increases that aren't bankable are just a mirage. But the justification for the sales development, SDR, sales development rep, is a justification based upon mirages, not reality. So the whole, for those people who don't know, the whole idea is that to increase the productivity of an expensive salesperson, you have a less expensive, less capable, typically younger individual who has one or two telephone conversations in advance of the more experienced salesperson's engagement. And the purpose of those conversations is to qualify the prospect. In other words, to determine whether or not the prospect is worthy of the more expensive salesperson's time. So that all sounds correct and fair and reasonable and mathematically defensible until you consider the perspective of the customer. So if I'm a reasonably well-educated, reasonably discerning buyer, and I'm talking to a 22-year-old nincompoop who's asking me invasive questions to try and determine whether or not I'm worthy of the time of his expensive overlord, that is what I would call an extremely ineffective and unpleasant selling conversation. Now, it's fair that if I'm prepared to endure the interrogation of the nincompoop, that there will be a high likelihood of my purchasing. So if we fail to progress beyond, high school statistics, we could be forgiven for looking at the increase in productivity measured at the salesperson and concluding that the sales development rep was adding value. But like I said, you don't bank dollars, you bank percentages. And what the sales development rep will do is reduce flow significantly at the expense of an incremental increase in the conversion rate of the salesperson.
So I would say that a lot of the SDRs they're growing out of that, and there's some really good SDRs. So I want to be cognizant of that. I wouldn't call them all nincompoops. However, that said,
it doesn't matter. It's a relative statement. The whole concept of the SDR hinges on the idea that you have a lesser skilled salesperson triaging opportunities for a greater skilled salesperson. So fair enough, if you may say, well, it's a little bit hyperbolic to call them and unnecessary to call them a nincompoop, but my point still stands. The whole idea of an SDR is that you have a less expensive person triaging opportunities for a more expensive person, and if you grow out of that, then you no longer have an SDR.
So now, how are you changing that? What's your role of an of an inside salesperson?
So we change it. We eliminate the requirement for. Well, I don't say eliminate. I mean, if you watch the movie Boiler Room, do you remember when that movie came out?
It's been a while. I haven't.
1950s, and it features one of those what do they call them? One of those shops in New York that sold penny stocks with a floor full of people who smile and dial.
Right.
And they recruited young people, put them in the firm, and their job was to get high net worth individuals on the phone. And if they got someone on the phone, wood ducks as they called them, they would patch the call through to an experienced closer. That's the SDR. Sounds like a recent invention, but it's that same idea reheated. Our alternative to that is to make sure that capable, highly paid salespeople have the very first conversation with a prospective client, the very first conversation. Because if you don't do a good job at that conversation, you don't get any more conversations with the prospective client. Now, the key to doing that is two things. Number one, free up a massive amount of time in the expensive salesperson's calendar by moving all non-sales activity elsewhere in the organization. Now, most salespeople spend 90% of their time performing non-sales activities. So if we can,
why don't you give a couple of examples of those non-sales activities?
Yeah, designing solutions, writing proposals, solving problems for existing clients, taking repeat purchases, stuff other than the pursuit of net new business. We focus salespeople exclusively on the pursuit of net new business, so winning new accounts or selling new categories of business to existing accounts. Okay. So if you unburden salespeople from all of those non-sales activities, by our definition, now they have a massive amount of capacity. And we're no longer in a situation where we have to be so intent on rationing salespeople's capacity because they have a lot more of it. So that's the first thing that we do. And the second thing that we do is, to the extent that we do need to filter opportunities or to filter the prospects that we feed to salespeople, we do it at the marketing team level. In other words, we do not approach, or we do not let our clients approach individuals that we do not want to sell to. So if we have a piece of software that we sell to banks for, let's say, let me make something up, for managing creditors, let's say, or debtors, managing debtors. If we have a piece of software we sell to banks for managing debtors, we would not allow the marketing department to push sales opportunities to the sales team without ensuring that the prospect, A, is a bank or works for a bank, and is the type of person who would make a decision about this kind of software.
So we'd hope, right?
Yeah. Now, the good news is, particularly if you sell to business, all of this information is in the public domain. Most individuals go to an enormous amount of care to cultivate their LinkedIn profiles and keep them current. So the marketing team can do a pretty good job of ensuring that that the sales opportunities they feed to the sales team are, opportunities with folks that have some likelihood of purchasing. And the third thing that we have to do is to recalibrate salespeople's definition of opportunity. Salespeople need to understand that an opportunity is not a valid opportunity only when a prospect admits that they're in the process of making a purchasing decision and they have budget. That's garbage. If someone's a genuine salesperson, their job should be to sell stuff to people who don't want to buy it.
So yeah, we call that demand generation as opposed to lead conversion, right? So a lot of people right now aren't waking up today saying, hey, I need what your product or service that you sell. you need to get at that out ahead where people don't even realize that they need what you have. So I
Yeah.
wholeheartedly agree there.
Yeah, I
Now,
mean, we charge organizations hundreds of thousands of dollars to go and completely tear apart and rebuild their sales functions. The number of executives who wake up each morning thinking about buying such a thing, and the number of organizations that have an allocation in their budget to invest in such a thing is roughly zero.
right.
So if we said, well, we're going to qualify all of our sales opportunities so that whomever is responsible for sales spends 100% of their time talking only to organizations who are in the process of purchasing sales process re-engineering projects, there would be none.
So walk us through how far do they push it in marketing? And then from that point, where does Inside pick it up? And then at that point, where would where
The marketing pushes it as far as they can without making a telephone call that
okay.
sounds like a sales call. So, for example, the typical thing that you would do is you would say, well, if we want to sell to banks, we go to Zoom or whomever your list provider is, and we get a list of all of the banking executives with a certain set of titles. We recognize that that data may be dirty because folks leave their job often, and depending on the sector, it may or may not have been researched recently. So if we make some trial calls to that data and we discover it's dirty, we may actually commission somebody to call and do some research calls to clean the list up manually.
Okay.
But the individuals who do the research calls will be researchers. They will not ask what are typically thought of as qualifying questions. They will talk to the receptionist and just confirm that John Smith is still the head of collections or whatever the case is.
Okay.
They will not try and talk to John Smith, and they'll certainly not ask John Smith any questions to determine to evaluate their propensity to purchase. So that's a limit that we put on marketing. The minute somebody picks up the phone and starts asking questions other than, is John Smith still your head of collections, that call is going to be deemed to be a sales call, whether or not your salespeople want it to be deemed that way.
Okay.
And if it's being performed by a person who isn't capable enough to be called a proper salesperson, as opposed to an SDR or BDR or whatever, then you are destroying value.
Now, are you then that salesperson at that point, the inside salesperson, they're having those initial conversations. So yours is mostly off of warm generated marketing leads, correct? So it's leads coming in from outbound marketing campaigns, and then your inside salesperson is having
well, hang on, it's not leads coming in. So,
okay.
so you're conflating a couple of things there. So if it's outbound, the leads are not coming in. So in our world, most of our clients, almost all of our clients, core sales teams are inside teams. Right. And in our world, the inside teams are not telemarketers; they're capable salespeople. So, many of our clients have salespeople who are north of $100,000 a year. Some of our clients have qualified engineers. We have a few clients where you couldn't be on the sales team if you weren't a qualified engineer. So okay. We're talking about capable salespeople. The process would typically be the marketing department would build a list of prospects. So the collections managers in banks, for example, they would come up with a compelling proposition. They would send a pre-approach email each day on behalf of the salesperson to a small number of those executives. And the pre-approach email would preempt the conversation, and the salesperson would call and continue the conversation that was preempted by the pre-approach email each day. So the leads would not be coming in, the leads would be outbound in most cases. Now, if organizations can generate some inbound opportunities, that's fantastic. They will be valued by salespeople and they should be added to the mix. But most of our clients are pretty aggressive about growth. And with the exception of a few sectors, it's just not practical to grow businesses aggressively if you have a sort of a religious devotion to inbound opportunities, as a lot of the Silicon Valley crew do.
Okay, interesting. So, well, I want to be cognizant of your time, so I can't thank you enough for jumping on board here. So as we wrap things up, Justin, I guess a couple of things is, having done this, being at this since 2007, what are some of the biggest things
No,
that,
no, I've been at this for 24 years. The book came out in 2007.
okay, got it. So 24 years, book since 2007. What are some of the biggest things that uh, businesses should avoid in trying to create this? It sounds like avoid SDRs from your vantage point, but what are some of the biggest things that they should avoid?
Um, I think avoid recognize that I think you need to avoid taking literally most, if not all, of the assumptions that underpin the orthodox approach or the traditional approach to the design of the sales function. If you made a list of kind of the default assumptions that underpin a general conversation that we had about sales, and then you examined those default assumptions and looked for evidence, then you would end up discovering that almost all of the default assumptions are false. Qualification does not add value. Field salespeople do not primarily operate in the field, and so on and so on and so on. You would
Okay.
find, individuals do not transact with your salespeople primarily on the basis of personal relationships. So most of the kind of axioms almost in the sales environment are false, and not just a little bit false. They are so false that they don't stand up to even the most cursory scrutinization. And some of them are so false that if you ask salespeople after making a sort of an axiomatic statement to explain what it is that they mean, your salespeople and your sales managers will stutter and stammer and try and avoid making the assumption explicit. So for example, if a salesperson says something like, oh, well, business is all about relationships, isn't it? And you stop them and say, hang on, I'm not sure that's true. Can you explain exactly what you mean by that? You will discover that a salesperson is very, very reluctant to explicitly state their belief that their customers do business with them primarily because of the personal relationship. That they would be uncomfortable making that statement.
Right.
Because they don't believe it's true, and B, because it casts them and their profession in a very poor light if they were to state that explicitly. And the same thing applies to a lot of these default assumptions. So that's the only thing that I would say. As Musk is famous for saying, particularly he said it often during the time he was developing SpaceX and coming up with these radical ideas like fuel tanks that land themselves, is start with first principles. If you want to be a revolutionary, don't start with the default set of axioms and reason from there. Question the axioms and start with first principles.
So that's a good hack then. So that was going to be my next question is, what's a good business hack for us, or one thing that we should really do? So question the axioms or the foundation on which you're basing your decisions, and design from scratch. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Think, in other words.
Crazy idea.
Yes. Who'd have thought?
So let me sum this up.
Value in thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me sum this up. So what you're really saying is, no matter what we call it, make sure that your sales team is constantly adding value, that they work as a team, that there's a division of labor, and that to really grow, you need demand generation as opposed to lead generation. If we
actually,
really
let me simplify it. Aside from thinking, which is probably the most abstract possible advice I would give you, let me go from the abstract right the way to the concrete, where the most concrete piece of advice that I could give you is count the number of selling conversations your salespeople in aggregate have every single day, number of selling conversations. And I would define selling conversations as conversations either on the telephone or face-to-face, lump them together, combine them as one, doesn't matter. Forget email and chat, just count the selling conversations, telephone or face-to-face, all of them. But only those ones that are performed in pursuit of net new business. So don't count them if a salesperson's talking to an existing customer about a repeat transaction. Don't count them if a salesperson is resolving an issue. just count the selling conversations performed in pursuit of net new business, count them accurately every single day, and make that number go up. Our approach, if you boil it down, and the reason we drive such aggressive growth for so many organizations, is what we do in very, very simple terms is we go into an organization, count how many selling conversations currently are being performed in pursuit of net new business. We take that number and we multiply it by 4 or 5.
Okay.
We don't do much else.
And to make sure that increasing by 4 or 5 times, net new business is also cross-selling, upselling, or is that net new logos, as they would say?
No, both. Both. So winning new accounts and selling new categories of business to existing accounts.
Perfect. Love it. So any resource other than reading and buying the machine, other resources that you might recommend to folks?
The Goal by Ellie Goldratt.
Okay. Love it. And then who, how, and why should they reach out to you?
Well, read the book first. In fact, read both those books first. Until you've read those books, it's premature. If you read those books and you have a oh my God, blinding flash of the obvious, as many people do, then the reason to reach out for us is if you want to execute on these ideas quickly as opposed to slowly. There's nothing that I advocate in the machine and nothing that Goldratt advocates in the Goal that you can't execute on without the assistance of others. The reason to talk to us is if you get so excited about those ideas that you want to execute on them really, really quickly, because we can help you execute really, really quickly.
It's all about the implementation. Love it. So with that, Justin, yeah, I can't think. Say again?
Business is all about speed.
Absolutely. Get after it. And that's really the difference. If your competitors are here and you can keep growing that distance, that's what it's all about. Can we be faster than the competition?
Speed of innovation and speed of execution.
Love it. So Justin, I can't thank you enough for your time and for participating on this. They'll reach out to you, and thanks again.
You're welcome, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.